Good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Henriette van Lynden lecture. It's a pleasure to see you all tonight in a Rode Hoed. Despite the temptation of an extremely beautiful night out there on the canals. A particularly warm welcome to our distinguished guests tonight, Khalid Al-Ghader, Hannah El-Sayed, and via Skype from Washington, Hala Al-Dosari. I'm Karin Wester from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I will be moderating the debate tonight. Before we get started, I would like to remind you to turn off the ringtones of your mobile phones. And also a few words about the nature of tonight's lecture. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs organizes these Henriette van Lynden lectures. In doing so, our objective is to facilitate a well-informed debate on current topics in the Middle East. Yet, as frequent attendees know, the views expressed and the perspective conveyed during these lectures do not necessarily represent the views of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, as some of you may remember, the last lecture we organized in February on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict took place on the eve of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to the White House. Tonight, we are discussing social and economic developments in Saudi Arabia in the wake of President Trump's much-covered visit to Saudi Arabia over the weekend. For those of you who suspect some form of collusion, let me reassure you that no, we are not receiving any classified information from the Oval Office regarding the President's meeting schedule. Connection happens to be purely coincidental. Having said that, I'm sure that many of you are here with fresh images in mind of President Trump's visit to Riyadh and of his speech yesterday to Arab leaders. And perhaps you're still processing the events and the comments aired over the weekend in various media outlets. Personally, I was struck by the fact that the visit itself had a strong focus on trade and security relations, but that almost each and every public discussion about it I saw, especially so in the American press, brought up the question as to how social and economic developments in Saudi Arabia and the promotion of equality and freedom would fit into the equation. This brings us to the topic of today's lecture, the position of women in Saudi Arabia. As we all know, women in Saudi Arabia face many constraints. When Saudi Arabia's country report was addressed by the UN Human Rights Council in 2013, Saudi Arabia received 225 recommendations, many of which were related to the position of women in the country. And the World Bank concluded in its 2016 report, Women, Business, and the Law, that the number of legal gender differences affecting women's economic participation is the highest in Saudi Arabia of the 173 countries assessed. And yet, we are witnessing signs of change. In 2013, a first group of 30 women was appointed to the Shura Council, which discusses legislation and suggests resolutions to the king. Women are now entitled to vote and to be elected in municipal elections. And Saudi Vision 2030, launched by the Saudi government last year, articulates an ambitious vision for the future of the country based on economic reforms and aims to increase the percentage of women participating in the workforce from 22 to 30%. Meanwhile, more women are entering the labor market, and a number of them are rising to prominent positions in the public and the private sector. This development is not new. Time magazine, for instance, carried a cover story back in 2009 entitled "Saudi Women's Quiet Revolution." But over the last few years, it seems to be accelerating. And this leads to the question we will be focusing on tonight. What will be the impact of the increasing participation of women in the public and private sector in Saudi Arabia? And can women be agents of change for broader social and economic transformations in the country? Our three speakers are all extremely well positioned to address these questions on the basis of their professional as well as personal experiences. All three of them are from Saudi Arabia, and I'm delighted that they were able to join us tonight despite their busy schedules. As you may have noticed, there has been a slight change in our program since Dr. Hatoun Al-Fassi, who was originally announced as one of our speakers, unfortunately had to refrain from participating in the lecture. Now, let me introduce the first speaker to you. Khaled Al-Ghader received a master's degree in global public policy from Harvard Kennedy School. He is the founder and CEO of GlowWork, an organization focused on women's empowerment, which has created thousands of jobs in Saudi Arabia. This led GlowWork to be awarded the best innovation globally for job creation by the UN, ILO, and the World Bank. In 2014, Khaled Al-Ghader was elected a Young Global Leader at the World Economic Forum for his work in social entrepreneurship. Previously, he was Chief Operating Officer of Markets at KPMG in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Jordan. He is the author of Communicating Effectively in the Workplace and publishes regularly in international outlets such as the Huffington Post. Khaled Al-Ghader is also a steering committee member of the Ministry of Labor of Saudi Arabia. He has just arrived this afternoon from Saudi Arabia, and we're very glad he's here. Mr. Al-Ghader, you now have the floor, and please give him a warm welcome.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Assalamu alaikum. Hello. So I'm very honored to be here today. I'm so happy that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Embassy of the Netherlands and Saudi Arabia extended this invitation. I've had a lengthy relationship with the Dutch Embassy in the Kingdom, and I'll explain to you during this presentation what we've been doing with the Embassy there. And through this presentation, what I wanted to showcase is a personal journey of what we started off 6 years ago, which would give you more of an outline of women's advancement in many areas, especially when it came to employment. I'll be very honest and very upfront of all the obstacles and challenges that we might have faced. And I look forward to your questions and comments when I'm done. All right, so I previously used to work in consulting, and you know consultants love numbers and figures and facts. And so one of the things while I was working in consulting was trying to understand the labor market more when it came to both men and women. There were no surveys or studies on the unemployment rationale or unemployment statistics during my time as a consultant. There was one study that I remember was done by an organization called BOOZ, and the study said that 60% of women that had PhDs were jobless, and this was in 2008. This is in Saudi Arabia. It was a statistic I remember very well because the Ministry of Labor at the time actually asked BOOZ to apologize that they released this study. So I used this figure and these studies to start looking more into the issues when it came to employment, and especially women in employment. And during my time as a consultant, I managed to organize a small little focus group with HR heads. And a focus group in Saudi means a gathering over shisha. So you get together and we started asking them questions of why aren't you hiring women? What's the issues that you're facing? And in everybody's mindset at the time, that hiring women was due to people not believing in them, laws, legislations, when in fact the issues that companies were facing when it came to employment is this gap between education and the labor market. Companies did not know how to find proper talent, and women did not know how to find these organizations due to many obstacles that we have in our society. So initially what we did is, when we started off GlowWork as an online platform purely to link female job seekers and organizations from different industries and sectors. We had a great response in the beginning. Multinational entities were signing up. We had Microsoft, the Cisco's, they all placed jobs for women, and things were going great. However, after a couple of months, we started seeing that there were no local businesses, which shape up approximately 90% of the private sector in Saudi Arabia. The reason being then was the fact that there was a segregation law, where companies, if I was a company and I had 50 employees, if I was going to hire women, I need to have a separate office space, separate door, separate entrance, separate many things, and that means high cost on my rent and high cost on my expenditure and capital expense, and from an employer perspective, it did not make sense. So we said, instead of focusing our business purely on online matchmaking, why not look at the offline matchmaking service as well? And we started looking at companies, and we do their filtering, screening, selection, and hiring process, and we place women into those companies, and we had a great reception because the labor market was not mature at the time, so there's not many professional recruiters. They don't know how to recruit. So we do that process all for them, and we found a great response. And so companies started opening up jobs or departments for women. One of those companies was a large supermarket chain, and this was back in 2011, in which we, at the time met with the chairman, and we hired women to work in accounting and in their HR, and they said, where else can we hire? We said, you can hire anywhere, even as cashiers if you'd like. And they were very open to it. We hired ladies to work in their front office, and it was the first time women worked in I believe in a public space outside of hospitals and education sector, where women were exposed. And so it received a lot of backlash from community. People were not happy about women working in a public space, in an open space. We thought maybe we went a bit controversial as well, because people thought they started off a hashtag against the supermarket chain. It caused a lot of issues, not just for us, but even the supermarket chain, where there was a boycott against this supermarket chain. So we said, let's step back and look at our other problem of the segregation law. And we went back and we had a same focus group with these organizations and tried to understand from them if it's just purely and merely the cost that was holding them back from hiring women. And they said yes. And so at that time we thought of creating this virtual solution or remote office solution, where a system enables you to hire remotely, and you can monitor both men and women from their homes. And since a high percentage of those that are unemployed are in rural areas where there are not many opportunities, this shaped up as a very good solution. At the same time, it would be a systematic manner to allow family and society to understand the value and the economic opportunity that shape up when women start working. So when women start bringing in money into the household, how they can grow a family together, how they can build a house together, and so forth. That was the idea, and that was the concept in the beginning. So we started with that. We did a pilot test with the Ministry of Labor in Saudi Arabia and the Human Resource Development Fund on testing the productivity level of women working from home versus those working in the office, to see, are they the same capabilities, the same capacity? Are you going to be able to monitor them the same? Is the retention level better? And we found that a high percentage from those that we did this test on, this pilot, that the retention level was higher, of course, that there was more productivity, more output, if the training provided to them was right. And at the same time, these women, after a period of 2 years, majority of them were told by their husbands or their fathers to go out to the private sector because they saw the income that they were bringing in was very important. So they said to them, now you can go out and work, because they saw them working alongside their male colleagues by emails and by phone, and there's no issue in doing so. So the family started adopting to it and accepting them to go out. So in that manner shaped up a very great response. And now today there is a legislation that's being finalized on remote working, which will effectively enhance the private sectors. Instead of outsourcing to different countries, they could outsource to women and men countrywide remotely. In 2011, the government came up with this subsidy for unemployment, which was called Hafiz. This unemployment subsidy was the first time the country actually had proper statistics on unemployment, because it allowed everyone that was unemployed to register in a central database to say that we're unemployed, we want money, please pay us some money until we find a job. What it did, though, is it gave shocking statistics, and at the same time, it was a very expensive move. So the government spent approximately $10 billion in the first year on unemployment subsidies. And at the same time, the data that was registered, there was approximately 2.2 million men and women that were registered as unemployed. 1.6 million of them were women, so 86% of that database was women. At that time, what we proposed as a social enterprise to the person that was the chairman of the supermarket became the Minister of Labor. That's one of how we were very lucky and fortunate. We proposed to this gentleman that instead of paying this subsidy for unemployment, why not allocate it to different recruitment offices in doing the search and selection for these ladies, and pay us a fee once they're first hired, and a fee once they pass 3 months, once they pass 6 months, and 1 year at the employer's place. So that allows me the opportunity to go to any company and say, I'll do your full recruitment at no cost. Companies are incentivized, government saves money, and it's a win-win situation for everyone. And there's positions that are open up for women. It took, of course, 6 to 7 months to get approved by the government, but it moved through, and we started as a public-private partnership with the Ministry of Labor on working on employment of these women. Now, during that time, there was a number of, let's say, legislations that came into place that helped and supported women into the labor market. So there was an increase in maternity leave. There's a law, but it's still not practiced properly, which is if you have 50 women in an organization, you must have a nursery inside your organization, or you pay for childcare. There is a look today at studying transportation and childcare subsidies at companies that have a percentage of women in their organization to incentivize the private sector to hire more women. There is a look at a number of other policies, such as the part-time policy, and last week was announced the hourly wage scheme as well, which is not currently in place in the kingdom, and as well as imposing a tax on foreign employers, which has incentivized the private sector to look at the local talent rather than seek talent from outside. So, so now, today, to hire a Saudi has become more, let's say, financially acceptable than it is hiring an expat as it was years before. So in terms of ecosystem, there's many things that have happened in the kingdom to encourage, let's say, more women in the labor market. Firstly, there's, in the last 10 years, 500,000 women graduates as opposed to 300,000 male graduates. So that by itself tells you that there is more talented women than there are men, and there needs to be something done. Secondly, the government for years has been trying to address the element of women employment. But at the end of the day, government is responsible for putting together the framework of anything, on any laws and any legislation, any drive of change. What it's down to is down to NGOs and civil societies and universities and education sectors, is to actually make this change happen. And so throughout the last couple of years, we've seen a number of NGOs and activists and members that are working towards the employment and advancement of women in the labor market. And I'm very proud actually today to be alongside a number of great Saudi women that have joined the delegation, that I honestly don't look at, I look at them as role models, not just for Saudi women, but they're all role models for Saudi men today. And I think that's been very key. And one of the things that's happened in the last 6 years is more knowledge of what Saudi women are doing. So in the last 6 years ago, during King Abdullah, and this is maybe classified information, but the Ministry of Culture and Information was told at the time to start publishing more articles about Saudi women in newspapers, in all the media outlets, to enhance people's knowledge and start accepting women more openly in different areas. So every day we start seeing articles about a woman doing something very unique and very special, in, either in the kingdom or outside of the kingdom. And that's been very helpful towards our goal and our mission. We've had, of course, let's say, some step backs in terms of acceptance from religious authorities. However, when people understand that the issue of women employment has nothing to do with religion, and it's more of a tradition over years that has not gone the way that we've wanted, and now there is ways to overcome it, it's been more accepted. And I'll give you an example 15 years ago of when nobody in Saudi would want to work in a bank, because working in a bank was deemed a sin if you work under certain financial rules, and working with interest is not allowed. And so the government, similar to this time, had an issue with employment because we could not accept any more Saudis inside government. And so they seeked out to one of the clerics, Sheikh Abdullah al-Mutlaq, who they asked him to look at this specific topic and see if we can find a way to get more Saudis to work in banks, because it deemed the best sector that Saudis were to work in. And the Sheikh came out and said it's okay to work in a bank as long as it's under Islamic financing regulations. Everyone started wanting to work in a bank. And today, over 70% of every bank has Saudi nationals. So the religious influence is a very important element in terms of our society, and it's a very important capacity. And that's, today the government is trying to bring the messaging and make it aligned. Education system has been opened up even more. Previously, women were, inside the segregated university. They cannot see what the companies are doing because companies do not enter inside the campuses. So whenever a woman graduates, the majority of them would graduate and they'd want to become teachers, because the only person that they'd see in 4 years is their teacher. And so today, what's great in the last 5 years is that internship is mandatory in every university. So you start seeing more women going out to different private sector institutions. They spend between 2 to 7 months at these companies to learn more about these companies, and then they have aspirations to work inside these organizations. And the cultural behavior has changed with the social media opening up a lot towards us. Previously we were only looking at what's happening within our own society and our own media channels. Today, social media has opened up, and also the scholarship programs, which I was very fortunate to go on and be a part of, has opened up my eyes and many other Saudis' eyes. So how and what it is, how beneficial it is to give back to your own community, and this working with women side by side, and how important that is towards building a family. One of the other things that we've been doing is establishing a career counseling centers inside universities. So this is a center inside Prince Sultan University. Every student today goes into this university and takes a test online, and then they sit with a career counselor to decide what is the best major to take, and then how to apply to different jobs, how to write your CVs, how to look for a job, because all of these things were lacking previously in the past. These are some of the organizations that we work with. Some that are not here, actually, Shell and Philips, which we're very proud to work with, Dutch entities in Saudi. Philips, we worked with when there was a company called Saudi Lighting Company, which was acquired by Philips. We hired for them 70 women that work, Saudi women that are working today on the assembly lines, and they put together the light bulbs there. And we're also very proud to work with the embassy, where we hired the first Saudi lady to work in the Dutch embassy as a translator last year, and she was deemed a great hero at the embassy. From GlowWorks' perspective, what we've been doing in the last 6 years is that, well, not just GlowWorks, the Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, and this is statistics that I have, 6 years ago there was 46,000 women in the private sector. Today it's jumped up to 560, and I think it's exceeded that number. That's over 1,000% increase. Through us, on a daily basis today, on average, we're putting around 28 women to work in the private sector, mainly in entry-level positions. And there's some things that are happening just recently as well in the kingdom, which is sending out a message. The 2030 vision, as mentioned here, is a very important element of what's coming next. Every part of the vision has a KPI linked towards women's advancement in this vision, which is very important. So today, when Donald Trump came yesterday to the kingdom and signed these mega deals and different lights and infrastructure and so forth, one of his KPIs is that this has to allocate a percentage of this to Saudi jobs, and Saudi nationals need to be working in these deals that are coming into the country. And by 2030, that this fully has to transfer into 100% Saudi jobs. And that means knowledge transfer has to happen over the next course of years. And that's part of the investment opportunity that's given to American companies or any other companies that are entering into the kingdom. Another message just recently sent by the government to everybody else is that on our stock exchange, we only had one lady previously, I believe, on the board of a stock-listed company. And just recently, the head of the stock exchange itself, as a Saudi lady, has been appointed, and that had some great messages to send out. And after that, we had one of the largest banks appointed CEO as a Saudi lady, and it's continuing from there. I'm not going to go into that. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khalid Al-Ghader. And it was a very enlightening presentation, I believe. And unfortunately, we also didn't get to the point where you could elaborate on the other initiatives you've taken, which I thought were very interesting as well, because there isn't only Glow Work, there is also Glow Fitness. Is that correct? Glow Fit for women now, and I've understood that Khalid's company is also working on an endeavor called Glow Bistro. Is that correct? It's already there, and it's women only in the kitchen, mostly.
The central kitchen is all female.
Central kitchen is only female, yeah. So, but we'll hear probably more about it in the Q&A. Our second speaker tonight is Hannah El Sayed. Hannah El Sayed obtained her master's degree in computer science from Boston University, and she worked in the banking sector in Saudi Arabia for a number of years before joining the Lynden Financing Company in 2001. The Lynden Financing Company is a private industrial, trading, services, and investment conglomerate with some 40 affiliated companies, ranking in the top 10 businesses in Saudi Arabia. In 2006, Hannah was appointed head of corporate communications of the company. And in 2013, she was appointed head of diversity, reporting directly to the CEO of the company. She is chair of the steering committee and of the advisory board of the Olayan Women Network. And she's also a founding steering committee member of the Gulf Cooperation Council chapter of the so-called 30% Club, which is a regional volunteer effort of multi-sector leaders working together towards better representation of women on boards and in senior level positions. Since 2015, Hannah actively advocates the economic inclusion of women in Saudi Arabia by a number of different initiatives, of which she will probably speak more later. Please welcome Mrs. El Sayed.
Give us a surprise. Okay.
We're supposed to see a very short film. I'm not sure if it works. If not, you want to try again?
Yeah.
There it is. Probably enough. Hannah, you now have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Saudi Arabia will celebrate its 85th anniversary this September. Formal education for women started in 1962, before I was born. From my perspective, I had a normal childhood and schooling as any girl in different parts of the world. In my lifetime, I witnessed great accomplishments for women, and by women in my country, which make me stand here proud to be a Saudi woman. Today, I am pleased to share with you the progress that Saudi Arabia made and is still making in the area of the economic inclusion of women. I'll be focusing on 4 elements I find relevant but not conclusive to this topic, namely women advancement in leadership roles, policies, education, and employment. Very few people know and appreciate the fact that Saudi Arabia has rapidly progressed in its women agenda, and by rapidly I mean in less than a decade. Here is how it happened. In 2013, women inclusion in the country's decision-making process became visible with their appointment as member of the Shura Council, which resulted in 20% representation, an aspiring measure for many countries in different parts of the world. The appointment of female Shura members, now in their second term, made a difference by first bringing in gender perspective on various economic and societal issues, and second, by helping spearhead improvements in civil rights for women. One example is the right to have an independent ID, of which she includes her children, irrespective of her marital status. In 2015, we witnessed the municipality elections where women were elected as councillors for the first time in the history of Saudi Arabia. They now occupy 10% of the municipality seats. Last year, Princess Rima bint Bandar was appointed as Vice President for Women's Affairs at the General Sports Authority, the first major breakthrough for women, surely not the last, in a historically male-dominated area. Also last year, 6 women were appointed as council members for the National Human Rights Commission. They represent about 21% in both full-time and part-time membership. Moreover, Saudi women also occupy key roles in some Saudi embassies and the Saudi delegations to the United Nations and its various bodies. We have also witnessed a number of women recently appointed into leadership board roles in some government commissions and in the financial sector, such as the appointment of Princess Al-Bandari Al-Faisal and Princess Madawi bint Msaad as members of the board of the Social Charity Fund, and my dear friend, role model, and one of the pioneer members of the Shura Council, Dr. Thuraya Ubaid, who has been recently appointed as a board member in the National Center for Social Studies. Some of you may not know, but these are very well accomplished women who are very committed to advancing the women agenda in the country. In the financial sector, we witnessed the appointment of 2 women into senior leadership positions, as Khalid mentioned just a while ago. One is the CEO of a financial institution, and the other is a chairperson of Saudi Arabia's stock exchange, Tadawul, the Arab world's largest bourse. Also just last week, the General Authority of Civil Aviation approved the appointment of yet another lady as the executive director and board member of the Dammam Airports Authority. The journey was not easy, nor without some setbacks. Last year, women lost elections in the executive board of some local chambers of commerce and industry. Faced with fierce competition, they bravely stood against seasoned and very well-experienced businessmen who have been members of the chamber since its inception many, many decades ago. The fact that a handful made it reflect the challenge and void and the importance of women's presence in such crucial economic roles. We now look at it as a silver lining that created a great opportunity for both men and women to learn and better be prepared for the next election term. Women have also been actively engaged in the decision-making process by participating in key activities pertaining to the execution of the country's vision for 2030, where it has a major impact on women entrepreneurs as well as small medium enterprises. I have personally participated in a series of such workshops that focused on developing solutions to address economic challenges and opportunities. I must admit that during these workshops, I have seen far more women from the government and women entrepreneurs than executives from the private sector. I will be reverting to this point later. The Saudi government pushed its agenda forward on the economic inclusion of women by putting in place policies and processes that enable it. New and improved laws on maternity leave, flexible working hours and place, and support of women working in the retail and telecommunications sectors are just few examples. In the private sector, the number of women grew remarkable tenfold in less than a decade. In 2009, we witnessed the graduation of the first batch of King Abdullah Scholarship Program, which started in 2005, and where today hundreds of thousands of Saudi youth, men and women, graduate from universities all over the world. This scholarship program not only gave Saudi students a golden opportunity to enroll in the best universities abroad, but also have a meaningful cultural exchange with different countries and societies. The impact of this educated youth will have on the future of Saudi Arabia has already started to be visible, with more Saudis joining the labor force, both private and public. The number of women working in the private sector grew in 2009 to nearly 50,000. The Ministry of Labor and Social Development reported a 33% increase in employment in 2013, where 85% of this increase was attributed to women joining the workforce. Today, we have nearly 600,000 women working in the private sector. About 29% of the Saudi private sector workforce, not so far away from other countries such as Norway, where women constitute of about 35% of the private sector. Moreover, in the public sector, Saudi women are about 40% of the workforce. The recent influx of Saudi women joining the private sector occurred at entry-level jobs. Women representation in leadership positions such as C-suite jobs and chairs or members of the boards remains very low. Saudi Arabia and other GCC countries lag behind due to the inherent fact that women are predominantly new entrants to the private sector. This is not an excuse, it is a fact. Employment remains a choice for women, and so is developing and cultivating a career. Women unemployment in 2015 data by the Saudi General Authority for Statistics reported 71% are in the childbearing age and 68% with university and postgraduate degrees. A clear indication that many women opt out of the labor market in favor of raising a family or simply relying on family financial support. It remains a challenge that these women will have difficulty rejoining the workforce beyond their maternity and childbearing years or after spending many, many years without employment. However, the ones that continue on their career paths are either comfortable in their respective zones, unaware of the opportunities that lead them to progress, or choose not to compete at the top. Saudi private sector constitutes of local and multinational organizations that operate in the country. Both have a responsibility towards the economic inclusion and professional development of Saudi women. Many local organizations have been pioneers and leaders in this area with successful results. At Al Ayan, we work tirelessly in order to cultivate opportunities to empower women in the workplace across all jobs, managerial levels, and industry sectors, and the industry sectors we operate in. We have been recognized as a best practice by the World Economic Forum for our gender diversity efforts. We hope to see similar efforts from the global organizations and expect them to locally adapt and apply their inherent principles of gender diversity and inclusion, as well as governance practices. We need to build the women leadership pipeline and have more women in leadership positions and on boards. This will only happen when organizations, local and foreign, put serious efforts in the professional development and advancement of women. Last November, I attended an executive women-only program at Harvard Business School in Boston. The topic was Women on Boards. The program was attended by 65 women, 44 from the USA, and the rest were from all over the world. Every professor that walked into the classroom asked us how many of us were often the only women in an executive meeting. To my surprise, and what I had thought was my reality to be the only woman present in executive meetings, turned out to be all of these other women's realities as well. It took me a while to bring my head around this, and I owe it to Harvard for explaining the reasons so wisely to us. This is the reality of women around the world. Let's be conscious of it whenever we attend executive meetings or in a room where important decisions are taking place. We need to change this. We need to support, mentor, and recommend more women to take part in these meetings. Let's also make this a promise. The remarkable progress for women in Saudi Arabia happened faster than the ability of many women to fully appreciate the opportunities that are made possible to them. This is especially critical when seen in the historical perspective of the youthful Saudi Arabia as a kingdom and as a country. We moved very rapidly, but we still need time Time to have this evolution settle in as a norm. Time to develop the women leadership pipeline. And most importantly, time to recognize current achievements, create and develop new ones. The responsibility lies within ourselves as individuals and professionals. We continue to anticipate and celebrate new roles for women. It's a long journey, not only in Saudi Arabia, but in the world as a whole. Each country may be at a different station on its journey, but we are all on the same path. Last October, I was in London on a similar visit as this one. I was asked, what would I like to see happen next for women in Saudi Arabia? My immediate answer, and without any hesitation, was, I want to see her a judge, a minister, an ambassador. I know my fellow delegates in this visit to the Netherlands also share these aspirations. I asked them this morning, actually. I now leave you with the same question. What would you like to see happen next for women in the Netherlands? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you also for emphasizing the long journey of women worldwide, in Saudi Arabia, elsewhere, and also in the Netherlands. I think that's a very good point, and I think many of us will probably be able to relate to that. So thank you very much. Let me now introduce you to our third speaker, or let me introduce her to you, Hala Al-Dosari, who will join us tonight via Skype. And I hope we will be able to see her image on the screen shortly. I think the technicians are working on that while I will introduce her to you. Hala Al-Dosari is a visiting scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, where she focuses on women's rights in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. She earned her PhD in health services research, concentrating on violence against women and its adverse health outcomes in Saudi Arabia. She has worked as a medical scientist, lecturer, and as an administrator in the Saudi health and education sector. In 2015, she completed a fellowship at Johns Hopkins University. Hala Al-Dosari currently directs a women's rights advocacy project online and participates in advocacy efforts aimed at promoting women's rights and empowerment in Saudi Arabia. She's also a writer and a blogger and comments regularly on Saudi political and social affairs in media outlets such as The Guardian, Foreign Policy, and Al Jazeera. In 2016, Hala Al-Dosari was awarded the Freedom Award by the American NGO Freedom House. Hello, Dr. Al-Dosari. I know you're not able to see us, but we are very happy to see you. So please give Hala Al-Dosari a very warm welcome here from Amsterdam.
Thank you, Karen. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for inviting me, and it was a pleasure actually listening to my previous colleagues and panelists. They gave us a very good overview of the historical prospect of women and the trajectory of women and the economic domains, basically. So I wanted to shift a little bit the attention from women themselves, who have proved themselves despite limited opportunities that were available to some of them, as very capable participants in building their own societies. I want to shift that into looking at the bigger picture, which is the macro level perspective, basically, of women economic participation. So 1 year back, Vision 2030 was launched in Saudi Arabia, and the vision committed to the provision of equal opportunities for men and women so they can contribute to their best abilities. The vision recognized that women outnumber men in graduation from university and the assets that women bring into the economy and the society. In fact, the vision placed a good objective to empower women and materialize their position, and from which different ministries in Saudi Arabia was supposed to devise objectives to reach by the year 2020 in the National Transformation Program. However, the translation of that objective, that broad objective, into tangible and actionable objectives was very much modest. So by 2030, the government committed to a mere 8% increase in the number of women in the workforce. The civil services jobs available to women to be 42% only. The top positions, commitment of the state to women was only allocated at 5%. And in light of these issues, we see that there is a problem of targeting the core system of why women couldn't be engaged in the public spaces. The ministries themselves are not acting to target those value system. Rather, they are trying to work with the existing restrictions. For instance, the Ministry of Labor and Social Development was tasked with providing affordable transportation for women who work, or not for women in general. The Sport Authority was tasked of licensing women sport facility or gyms. So in looking into these objectives and looking at the modest translation of Vision 2030, we should consider why women unemployment in Saudi Arabia is one of the lowest globally. And I do disagree with the previous panelist that women in general in the world are facing the same barriers. We are faced with very unique situations in Saudi Arabia that is very much grounded in the belief system, in the value system, and in the political authoritarian rule that we live within. In his book, Hisham Sharabi has devised a concept that is called New Patriarchy. New Patriarchy is a system in which Arab states fail to modernize the institutions or the enabling environment for people to reach their full potential and engage meaningfully in the economy or in other domains. In this system, the patriarchal institutions and traditions that was prevalent before the state were reproduced by power structures and networks in which women engagement remained limited, mainly dedicated to caregiving rules, and the patriarchal norms and values are constantly reproduced in the institutions of the new states. You've mentioned the World Bank study in 2016 that was conducted to explore broadly what kind of barriers exist on women to meaningfully get themselves engaged into economic opportunities. That study was conducted in 173 countries, and it's not surprising that Saudi Arabia came in that study as the highest in the number of legal restrictions imposed on women. And these barriers are not merely whether education was available or not, whether women were able to find a job, but what types of jobs, what kind of access or blocked access exists when women are trying to get into those jobs. So things like the gender differences in women's access to passports, travel, getting education or getting training, or getting, for instance, the decision to commute, being mobile without conditions, being able to negotiate responsibility in the household, being able to choose where to live if the family that she lives with is not an enabling family, confer her citizenship to children without having to relocate herself and her education somewhere else because she's not treated equally like her fellow male citizens. Being able to negotiate marital property so that she can manage her own affairs and grow business and develop and engage into economy. Finding legal redress at courts. Finding personal status law that would not discriminate against women. in issues of marriage, divorce, child custody, visitation, and others. In that study, married women were found to be at disadvantages than single women because of the need to be obedient to their husbands and the court's recognition of the husband's authority to decide on women's issues. Those same findings were as well reflected in a study conducted in between 2012 and 2013 by Jeddah Chamber of Commerce, where they've looked into what kind of barriers exist for women to be more engaged into the workforce and the public spaces. Women identified the lack of availability of childcare facilities, basic things, affordable childcare facilities at workplaces, availability of suitable job opportunities within reachable distance, and commute. Commute and transportation was main deterrent for women, not only to find jobs, but to stay on those jobs. It is therefore not surprising that educated women of good academic achievement were not able to engage meaningfully in opportunities because basically, as Khalid was saying, many with higher education could not find matching jobs or could not find matching jobs within the places where they live because of the restriction in mobility and travel and other things. So the root causes of the Saudi women inability to be engaged meaningfully in the society is not merely academic achievement. It's mainly the enabling environment, the restrictions on their autonomy, the restrictions on their mobility, which complicate them being able to reach their full potential or exercise choice, even when it's contradicting to those of their male guardians. I think we all heard about the campaign for the male guardianship system. So the concept of the male guardianship system offers a good example how the religious ethnic identity, which is promoted by the state, impact women's lives on so many different levels and not necessarily on the economy. So the state grants and assigns next of kin male relative, usually a husband or a father or even a son for older women, the right to decide on a woman's behalf on a host of issues, including her choices in personal or public life. So things like scholarship, marriage, getting a life-saving abortion, finding redress from abuse or violence, even staying in jobs. So the government is finding it more and more difficult to enforce a law that will allow women to get job even when their guardians were not approving, because that clause could not be enforced in reality. It is something that happens inside the homes, and the courts are not engaged enough to protect women. So the system assumes, the guardianship system assumes that men are better fit to be superior in decision-making in the household. And in that sense, the state considers women as citizens by proxy, only allowed to exercise choices over their lives, the lives of their children, or in public life in general, with the approval of men. And instead of having those rights protected and guarded and directly awarded by the state. So the position of women is similar to that of foreign worker, in which the sponsorship system determine his access to a host of issues. Only in the case of women, the guardianship system is there for life and not only during the contract, during the term of her contract. The system is more enforced in religious courts, so they legally punish women who challenges the authority of guardians under the charges of absence from home or disobedience, whether they were adult women or they are financially independent women. Guardians can request the courts to punish women for those offenses. And women activists have brought the issue of the guardianship, the impact of the guardianship system on women to the attention of the state through petitions, through advocacy campaigns in 2008, 2013, during the UPR of Saudi Arabia, the Universal Periodic Review of Saudi Arabia in the Human Rights Council. I've been engaged in the 2013, and the issue has been raised. The Saudi delegate at the time made a commitment to review the system and abolish it. And we are now at 2017. and nothing has happened. In fact, in August last year, I reviewed a report that was done by Human Rights Watch in which the aspects of the guardianship system on women's lives were documented. We've gathered statements from inside the state, Saudi Arabia, and we've included stories and cases which explore the different aspects of the system in women's lives.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, and we're all listening very intently here, but perhaps if you could wrap your presentation up in 1 or 2 minutes, that also leaves us some room for questions, and we hope you'll stay with us also for the Q&A. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. What I want to reach is that despite women lobbying online, because that's the only space for women to voice their grievances and concerns, for over 300 days, nothing meaningful happened. And this is not because women are not talking or feeling or recognizing the impact of the system. It's because they are marginalized and distant from the decision-making, from the deliberation of decision-making, despite the fact that certain women have been appointed in decision-making capacity, which goes back to the idea of how can we change or how can we engage in meaningful gender reforms, legal gender reforms, if the voices of those who are affected and impacted by those issues are not part of deliberation and decision-making. So having a handful of women appointed in the state, and those women were not empowered to basically engage in meaningful deliberation is not enough. Now, I've written about the role of women in the Shura Council. And of course, I am with women having to be appointed equally in all boards with equal number. But then having to be in the Shura Council where their voices and where their mobilizations are not enough and not heard. And the regulations, they are mainly dominated by men, and the regulations would require majority of voting for resolutions of legal gender reforms is not going to change the whole thing. So without having women as part of the framing the legal culture, framing the way that we deliberate policies, without having civil society empowered and flourished in order to be part of mobilization around those issues, it's going to be very difficult for women to change the status quo. And it will not change anything except reproducing whatever norms that exist in the political system. And for those women who are handpicked to lead institutions, they will not be able to enact massive reforms because they are expected to be part of the political mindset.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hala Al-Dosari, and please give her an applause. Well, maybe later on. We've now heard three rich and thought-provoking presentations which explored very different sides of the equation, I believe. And I am sure that the audience has many questions, and I'll open the floor in a moment. But one first question to begin with, which I think touches upon all three of the presentations and also relates a little bit to discussions here in the Netherlands. A number of weeks ago, as most of you will probably know, Saudi Arabia was elected to become a member of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. Now, that provoked a lively debate internationally, also here in the Netherlands. And I'm very interested in hearing the views of our three speakers on this matter. And do you believe that Saudi's membership of the Commission on the Status of Women could possibly contribute to the empowerment of women in the country, and how? Hannah, would you like to first check? Hala, did you ask my question? Did you hear my question?
Yes, I did. Thank you. I did.
Okay, I'll give you the floor in a moment. But Hannah, would you like to respond?
I was actually very pleased to hear this, and I think it's a golden opportunity for us it's a golden opportunity for us as a country on two folds. One is in aligning our efforts towards gender improvement or women agenda, advancing the women agenda, along the lines with what the United Nations is actually doing or trying to achieve, and also with our internal efforts. So this is on one side. The other side of it, I think it also gives us the opportunity to bring in the Saudi perspective into the Gender Commission as well, which is also very much an interesting perspective, whereby we are culturally and traditionally and a religious country, so that we are able to represent the Arab and Islamic perspective into the gender equality or the Gender Commission. So those are my views on the subject. So I celebrate it, actually.
Thank you. That's good to hear. And Hala, could I ask you for your views on this matter? How did you perceive this election and the discussion also that surrounded it?
Yeah, well, basically, the UN in general, UN intergovernmental departments in the UN is tasked with certain mandates, is to promote gender equality and within certain framework, which is the human rights framework. And it's not subject to debate when it comes to countries reserving the right not to apply human rights according to the UN views. So I doubt that would be an issue for Saudi Arabia to be there just to push their own views of how human rights should be deliberated or to change basically the mandate of the UN. So I don't see that as a point. The other thing is that if the UN bodies are part of a process in which all countries are equally part of, taking role in different entities, that is understandable. But the rationale that I heard from Margaret Wallstrom, who was presenting here in the US, is that her country supported the effort because they believed that the engagement of Saudi Arabia within those, departments or those UN departments is helpful for Saudi Arabia to align itself with the international and global values. And I really object on that because what happened when Saudi Arabia was part of the Human Rights Commission, the Human Rights Council, Saudi Arabia was a member since 2013 for 2 terms. And during that time, we have witnessed the release of the anti-terror law that treats activists as terrorists. And we've seen the crack on civil society, the crack on independent activists, people who are calling for promotion of human rights, either under travel bans or imprisoned or basically defamed. So I don't see the rationale, except that it represents the best interest of governments and not the people. It does not empower the civil society to have a say or to engage into the process of promotion of rights, whether in gender equality or in other human rights. So I definitely think of it as a political institution now that is subject to political interest of the regimes, which might not necessarily reflect the best interest of the people.
Thank you, Hala. I believe we are two diverging views here, and I'm interested in hearing some more views and perspectives of our speakers based on the questions that we're now going to take from you in the audience. So I would like to invite you, if you would like to ask a question, to raise your hand. And I would also like to invite the Saudi members in our audience to raise their hands if they would like to ask a question. And if you get the microphone, please introduce yourself briefly and ask one question at a time, and keep in mind the question mark. Whom can I give the floor? I see a gentleman there in the back. There's a lady there.
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Mehmet. I'm a PhD researcher in Amsterdam. In the first presentation, there was a mention of a 12-fold increase in women's participation in private sector jobs. However, going on Hala's point, what percentage of these jobs were higher paying than teachers? Because you can also be in the private sector as an assembly line worker, you can also be a telecommunicator, you can be a phone person, or you can, be an intern in a financial firm. So do you have data? Do you have statistics on this?
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll take a couple of questions at a time before we answer them, and I'll repeat them for you, Hala, in case you were not able to hear them. I see the lady over there. Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Yasmin Jawad. I'm a freelance social researcher, particularly women of the Middle East.
Could you speak up a little bit, because it's a little hard for us to hear here.
My name is Yasmin Jawad. I'm a freelance social researcher in women in the Arab world. My question is actually, is it, you know, the title of the lecture today, is it troubling me? Secondly, what kind of times of change is expected from Saudi women? That brings me to a picture where I have the question in three angles. The Western economic interest on the top. You have the Saudi with their wealth, and it is a religious conservative.
Excuse me, but could you come to your question, please?
How we accommodate the Western economic interest with the human rights of empowering women in countries like Saudi-Arabiya, for example. Why I'm saying this question? Because Iraqi women, for the last 50 years of the 20th century, they were the most advanced women in the region. But since 2003, when Iraq was invaded, it is replaced with the same government, type of government in Saudi Arabia, type of Khomeini in Iraq. Now, women have been left to Middle Ages.
I would like to finish this question, because there are other people also who would like to ask something.
How we accommodate the Western economic interest, right, in the region with the human rights of women, in fact, is disempowering women more than empowering women.
Okay, I believe that was clear. I think we'll take two more questions. First, the gentleman over there, and then the lady over here in the front.
Hello, my name is Elias Shirali. I'm a student at Lynden University. I think my question is slightly less loaded than the question before. I had a question for Mr. Khalid. Because obviously in your function with your company, you've achieved quite some successes. And I was wondering to what extent you've faced obstacles in the sheer being of a male representing female values. Because I can imagine that often you can receive criticism along the lines of males cannot represent female values and can also not push, and it's always the women who are in a better state to do so. So have you received any obstacles in your being as male in the function that you've provided?
Thank you. And we'll take one more question here at the front.
Yeah, my question is to Khalid and then the other participants. Really very impressive. The three of you give so much hope when it comes to change. And it is, when I hear you, it's the beginning. But my question, when it comes to the education sector, any steps that are taken by you, like an initiative by you, Khalid, or you? And also, social media is is all over Ivanka giving, 100 million for what you're doing, Khalid. Why Ivanka? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we could just start with the last question, which was addressed primarily to Khalid. And maybe, Khalid, you could also address the previous question about how is it as a male to be representing female interest in a society like Saudi Arabia? How was that perceived in the course of the last 6 years?
Okay, well, thank you very much. So yes, I'll start with the education sector and what's happening there. So as I mentioned previously, what I see, the whole reason for lack of or percentage of unemployment of women is high is the gap between education and the labor market. And so in the last couple of years, the kingdom's just opened up the largest university in the world, which is a female-only university, which holds up to 65,000 female students per year. This in itself has, when people are graduating and when women are graduating and not finding an opportunity, has raised some alarms. So today, the government's looking at privatizing universities and privatizing majority of the government sector. And one of the KPIs on the government universities are that they will not get their funding unless the people that are graduating actually find jobs. So universities today, instead of just being a place that helps people graduate and not find an opportunity, they have to become the job creators, the ones that go after making sure that the students find an opportunity once they graduate, otherwise they don't get paid. Internships and co-op opportunities and the summer jobs and the awareness around that has also been very helpful when it comes to women in the labor market. It's very important for them to understand what is out there in the private sector, because unfortunately till time that I was studying, there was not much in the curriculums about different companies in the private sector, for instance. So we'd not do case studies on a Shell or a Philips, and we don't know much about them. And again, that's not down to the universities. I believe that's a lack from the private sector itself. The private sector has a mission that they need to go out and create more of this employer branding, which is very important for people to be more aware about them. In terms of
Social media, perhaps?
Yeah, so okay, that goes along with the other question on let's say, what are the interests for us to look at other governments' requests on women advancement and so on. I don't think Saudi Arabia really cares what other countries think about us when it comes to women advancement. So if it did, things would have happened long time ago. Today, the country is developing by itself, by the society itself. So civil society, the NGOs, they're the ones that are creating this difference under let's say, the guidance of the government or the framework that the government has provided. When it comes to Ivanka and the human rights as well authority that or the Women's UN Assembly that we've joined, I believe these are all important aspects, because in the last decades, one thing that I criticize my own country for is that we're very poor at marketing ourselves. And I really believe that it's very important that we market ourselves. People need to see what we've been doing. And they need to hear more about what we're doing, and that's purely what it is. And I think, today, sessions like this, if we were not able to be here, you would not have had 3 different perspectives about what the country has. Just of what? No, that's absolutely not my idea. No. And there's one question on the obstacles. As a male, people would think that it would be more easier for a man to be doing this in the kingdom, and in fact it's not, because actually those that are opposing me are mainly women. That I don't know why, and they're the most challenge that I face on a day-to-day basis. However, it's given a different perspective. So when we're working and doing what we do, a lot of companies do ask, why are you doing this? Is it because you want to get more girls' numbers? Is it because they want to understand what's the reasons and the purpose? When in fact every family, every household, somebody has a mother, have a sister, they have a daughter. They want to make sure that at the end of the day, they're economically empowered and they have a place in the labor market. And I saw that from a personal perspective, whether it's my mom or my sister or my cousins and aunts. If the obstacles that they faced, I believe that it's very important that we worked on. It's not just me. There's many other men that are empowering, are working on towards empowerment of women. And I've said this also before, very openly, that women do not need men to stand up for them. They need men to stand beside them in this fight against empowerment and thank you.
Thank you very much, Khaled. And I also believe that you made a point in response to one of the questions that the change in the society in Saudi Arabia has to come from within. It is coming from within. So did I understand you correctly that you said, well, Western policies don't make so much of a difference, actually? Is that when it comes to social and economic development within Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I mean, you know, every day we get talked about the women driving, for instance, and it will happen, but it will happen from us.
Yeah.
It does not need anyone to tell us what to do, and it's waiting for us as a society, firstly. And King Abdullah said it, and Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said it. Once the society is ready for this, it will happen.
Yeah.
And whenever everyone is ready, when it's accepted, it will happen. And I believe that's how it is. And that's why our country is the most stable country in the world, because we've not had everything has been extremely going throughout this process.
Thank you. Hala, I will ask you to respond also to this point in a moment, but I would first like to give the floor to Hannah, next to me, to respond to a number of questions, maybe also the point that Khaled just made. And there was a question specifically addressed to you on the increase of the percentage of women working in the private sector. But perhaps the point Khaled just made, could you also reflect on that? Because I'm interested in hearing your ideas as well.
We had actually a very interesting session this afternoon where this point was also brought up. And the discussion was like, it is very easy to criticize the society or Saudi Arabia from a Western perspective, because you're bringing in Western value into a foreign culture. And you don't see it the way we see it. So you're bringing your values onto our culture. We don't do it the same way, the other way around. We don't bring our values and judge you based on our values, because we realize that you are different and you are who you are. So this is actually one perspective of seeing it. And I second what Khaled said, the change has to come from within. I'm not changing for you, I'm changing for me. You know, it's as simple as that. There's also, I think the gentleman in the back asked something about jobs. And if all the jobs, if I may just answer that as well. What we have done at Olayan is that we have taken a stock of all the jobs that are within the organization, and we are about 40 plus operating companies. And we looked at them and said, which are the ones that women can do, and which are the ones that, for many reasons, are not suited for women. And we took away those, and we kept a certain number, which was a benchmark for us. And when I say a benchmark, that means that it is across all levels. Today, on a monthly basis, we measure what are the jobs that are occupied by women. This is number one. We also measure women are at what managerial level in the organization. And we make sure that we monitor these numbers and advance them and keep on pushing them. Right now, where we stand is that we are at 90% of our benchmark because we have pushed in that direction. And I don't mean that just only jobs. We operate in many sectors. So there are many sectors that we, different sectors has different jobs. And I would actually invite everybody, if you are interested to know about the Olayan Group Gender Diversity Program, just to Google it. And there is recently a case study that has been done on us as a best practice in the region that you can look into the entire program, and you can see there that the jobs are not predominantly at entry level or at one particular job families. We make sure that women actually have the opportunity to work at the entire spectrum. So this is my answer to you. And if I may quickly for the education, because the lady asked, what are you doing about education? Olayan actually is doing a lot for education. We have scholarships, we do internship, and we give opportunities for co-ops. We also invited students last year to attend our Olayan Women Network Forum, just to show them how we are and how we engage our women with the executive management. I personally lectured couple of times, invited to lecture a couple of times at the university, so I also do that. And as Karen said earlier, I advocate the economic inclusion of women. And part of what I do, and this is out of pocket, I do workshops where I actually invite people randomly to realize and appreciate the fact that the economic inclusion is not just employment. So for me, it's not education per se, but it is some sort of a creating an awareness so that people realize what does the economic inclusion entails.
Thank you, Hannah. And I'm glad we still have the Skype connection with Hala over there. I thought we missed it for a moment, but fortunately enough, you're still there. So Hala, I would like to ask you to reflect on the number of questions, and especially also the one mentioned, or the points made by the speakers here next to me, that change in the society has to come from within, and that actually perhaps policies by other states, also Western states, have limited impact or no impact. So if you could reflect on those issues and a number of the other questions, thanks.
That's exactly the core of what we're calling for, is to allow independent media, to allow civil society actors to be able to engage in different levels without threats of exclusion or of persecution. Without having people inside Saudi Arabia heard, that will be a problem. So every time the argument of human rights as foreign, the argument of human rights as imposed on a certain state because of its unique culture, its unique religion, culture generally comes in terms of religion, this is something to fend off, embracing those ideas. The ideas of human rights are not foreign from our culture. We're very much a socialist culture in Islam. We very much look after each other, to empower each other. So freedom of choice is not foreign. Freedom of gender empowerment, basically women being able to decide on a host of issues in their lives, including in marriage, without enforce, without imposing anyone's ideas on her, is not foreign in Islamic context in the history of Islam. So all of these arguments are in a way actually is distant, putting Saudi Arabia on a distance from the rest of the world. Although they claim that we are coming to base to those concepts and to those ideas on our own terms, but we're very much engaged on the world order. We're very much engaged, as you've seen from Trump, the Ivanka fund, or Trump's close relations with the Saudi system. What we're seeing is that we are part of an international organization. We're committed to a world order that believes within shared values. So it is not women's rights that should be excluded from this shared values or any other human rights concerns. I would like to say there is a real concern when economic interest is viewed from the point of view of multinational companies. And it's not because of the culture, it's because of the lack of unions and representation of the right of workers that is largely absent in countries like Saudi Arabia, where freedom of association, of assembly, of expression is very much limited. And representation is done by appointments rather than by people electing their own representatives. So we do have a lot to go for, and it's not because of our culture. Definitely, our culture is not foreign to the idea of human rights. Is not our religion is not foreign to the idea of human rights and choice. So I wouldn't like to use that argument on any level. Rather, we embrace those ideas and values, and society in Saudi Arabia is very much calling for those rights. It's not ideas that comes from outside. I am a Saudi, and I've been engaged with very much a diverse group of activists coming from all different sects, regions, ages, men and women who are calling for those rights. We do not bring those ideas and values from different countries. So we are part of our country, and we claim that these things should happen, and it's the responsibility of the state to ensure that rights are protected, that enabling environment are protected, and we cannot wait until everyone come to terms with the idea of women driving, as if we're saying we cannot give anyone rights as long as someone doesn't want to use it. So these types of arguments that really blame the society instead of having the government accountable and responsible for protection of rights, protection of enabling environment for the people, is very much harmful to the economy. So no matter how much we preach to people on how much they need their jobs or how much they need to be engaged in decision making, if the environment is very much limiting, those ideas will not translate. Just want to say something about women engagement in the workforce. The surge in women engagement in the workforce happened with the feminization of the retail sector. So about 450,000 women joined jobs in, as cashiers or as sales agents in the malls when the restriction to women working on those environments was removed by the Ministry of Labor. So this is basically what I wanted to say, and I think that we need to be more inclusive and not as a society, and to acknowledge that economy and human rights are part and parcel of each other. So human rights is not something that you can abandon or not look at or think of it as something that will be a byproduct of economy.
Thank you, Hala.
Good economy is actually a byproduct of respecting human rights and enabling people.
Thank you, Hala. That's very clear. I believe we have time for one more round of questions. So if you have pressing questions, please raise your hand. The lady here in the first row, please.
Okay. My name is Noura Lakel from the Saudi delegation. I just want to comment on the Ivanka Fund. It was an initiative in the W20, which is a women in G20 countries. And this initiative was presented by Merkel, and Ivanka adopted this initiative by doing fundraising, and that was part of the things and why Saudi funded that fund. It will allow Saudi entrepreneurs to benefit from that fund. That's in one perspective. And the other thing that I agree with Hannah and Khaled, that the change should be within the country, and it's surprisingly I just don't understand, Hala, why would you say all these things if you believe that the change has to be within, with all these human rights? The context here, how it will help. How do you think will help in having all these changes that you mentioned implemented in our country?
Thank you. We'll take a couple of more questions. Let me see. Yes. Maybe the lady over there, Hannah, who's got her hand raised. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Dika, and I'm a human rights student from the Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I have a question that ties into the idea of change has to come from within. And my question is that we've heard different views about the policies, as well as enhancing women's rights as restricting women. And my question is, how do women in Saudi Arabia actually claim their rights within the culture? So maybe different ways than only looking to legislation.
Thank you. That's a clear question. And I saw two more hands raised there. Yeah, there's gentleman over there. I'm not sure. Yes, thank you. And the lady in the middle.
Yeah, my name is Martin van der Burg and I work for the Ministry of Finance. And I have a question for Mr. Al-Qudair. I hope I didn't butcher the pronunciation of your name. Your initiative sounds really interesting and great in the short term because it enables women who previously couldn't enter the labor force. However, I was thinking maybe in the long run, couldn't it be maybe detrimental because you're sort of enabling a system to continue to exist that completely separates a woman working from their home and men working in offices? So might it not be actually counterproductive in the long run?
Okay, thank you. And we will take one more question. The last question is for the lady in the middle there.
You do it? Okay. Eileen Fokker, I'm from the Graduate Women International. I've got a very practical question for the gentleman over there. You say there are 5,000, there's a new university which is all women, and there are a lot of women. What do they study? Are they studying STEM? And if they do, then you make an easier connection with the labor market. It's one of the big problems almost in every country at the moment, is that the subjects being studied at the universities are not completely in line with the labor market asking for certain studies.
Thank you. Khaled, would you like to take the first questions? I mean, it's the last question and the previous question also about whether the endeavor you're undertaking may ultimately not be counterproductive because it keeps women segregated, if I paraphrase the question. Would you like to respond to that?
Sure. So we don't work on placing women at home unless it's deemed necessary. So placing women to work at home are for women that are in rural areas where there are no opportunities and where companies today are outsourcing their call centers, for instance, or their graphic design to other countries such as Egypt, India, and so on. So what we do, instead of this outsourcing model to other countries, we try and convince them to outsource to women in rural areas and allow them the opportunities to work. That's one. Number two is we place women inside inside offices, obviously. The labor law today is not how it was previously, where segregation was a must. Today it's much more flexible. The government wants more women to work, and so there's a flexibility in terms of how the office should be arranged, as long as there is a place to relax and they're able to take off their abaya, a place for prayer, a place for lunch, and a separate washroom. That is what is acceptable in a normal private sector. Today we work with 500 companies throughout the kingdom, whether it's multinational or local, on placement of women in entry-level positions and in leadership positions. Of course, in all honesty, a majority of these positions are entry-level that we've been working on, but today, in the last 5 years, there's been more of a push to get senior women to be hired, whether it's heads of departments or heads of companies and so forth, and we've been gladly working on those. The last question that was on the mismatch between labor market and the education sector. Again, that's the ultimate issue that we have in the kingdom. I believe the mismatch between the graduates and what's available in the labor market is extensive. Lack of career counseling as well. So a woman would go into a university based on what her parents would want her to study, and then she would want to study something totally different, and her capabilities are something much more different than all of that. And unfortunately, they do not realize this until either after graduation or before graduating in a year's time. So they change. There's a high percentage of women that change their majors in the first 3 years. However, today there's this close alignment between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Labor. It's been happening on what are the outcomes of the education sector, and that's again it's tied down to the privatization of the education sector. So the universities will not get compensated by government unless they are getting graduates to graduate and to get hired, and that's the only way that they get compensated by the government. So it's true in the past we've had a mismatch, but I believe that's in every country. There are mismatches in terms of that. What we're trying to do today is there's a look at vocational training as well. So those that have a mismatch in terms of what they've graduated and want to improve their skills, a lot of vocational training centers and colleges have opened up in the past couple of years, and there's many more that are going to open up in the next coming years in very specific fields.
Thank you very much, Khaled. Hala, would you like to reflect on a number of questions that were being asked? And one of them was, how do women claim their rights currently in Saudi society? And the other question, I'm not sure, do we still have the Skype connection?
Yes. Yes, I can.
Okay, you still hear me? Yeah.
I hear you. I'm just trying to recharge my device. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Otherwise,
Yeah.
maybe I'll first go to
Yes, if
Hannah
you can go
next
to
to me.
Hannah, yeah.
Yeah,
please
does it
do.
work? We can, yeah, yes, there you are. So there were two questions I thought that would be interesting for you to reflect upon, and one is how do women claim their rights currently in the Saudi society, and the other one was from someone from the Saudi delegation here in the front row. How will human rights actually help? No, would you like to phrase it again?
How is the shared information she shared with us today would help in having the change within our country?
Yeah.
Because I don't think whatever she shared is relevant actually to the discussion.
Yes, okay. The other question was, I'm not sure she heard it, so I'll repeat it. How the information you shared with us today would be helpful in order to effectuate the change from within. So did you hear those two questions, Hala?
I did. Can you repeat the first question? I'm sorry, I didn't get the first question though. How women can attain their rights within Saudi Arabia?
I'll repeat the two questions. How do women claim their rights in the society? How can they do that? What instruments do they have? And the second one was, how does the information you shared with us today, how would that help to effectuate change from within the society? Those were the two questions that I thought would be interesting for you.
Yes. So the first question, how women can help, each other to attain rights, is to be vocal, is to represent their demands, is to support their demands within their networks. So that's what we've been doing. I've been petitioning the government. I've written petitions to the king on a host of issues, on the guardianship issues, on the which includes restrictions on employment or economic opportunities and links to violence, and on the issues of other freedom of expression or driving. We've lobbied, we've organized ourselves within the spaces that were available to us across different domains, mainly virtual reality or social media, have provided women with means on how to act and voice their concerns on these issues. But again, as a person who worked before within the Saudi system, I know that my mission, as I used to write actually as a news person. So I worked as a medical scientist. I worked as a op-ed writer. And in all those missions, I've tried so much to highlight the needs and the issues of women from the perspective that might not be necessarily adapted by the state. Which takes me to the second question. How discussions on women's issues, on concerns of women, would be relevant outside Saudi Arabia. So this is something that is usually presented as offensive to the government. If we are seeking engagement from within, we should only talk about our problems through the official channels, meaning only to people in charge inside Saudi Arabia. But we see this, at the same time, people are engaging in discussions about their countries outside Saudi Arabia. The fact that the question was not presented to the other speakers, or the fact that the question was not presented to official delegations who are representing Saudi Arabia in UN or in Human Rights Council or in any other international organization, is saying something. That we think that discussing our own issues in a manner that is clear, honest, that reflects our own concerns, is somehow harmful to the reputation of the state, which is a standard that is usually promoted by the state itself. While you can't reach, I believe, as a person, you cannot reach a real resolution of any problem unless all voices are included. In fact, working towards gender-inclusive policies would require that people who are marginalized, people whose voices and interests are not part of the power structure, to be included in any discussions. So if you have a discussion, whether inside Saudi Arabia or outside, where Saudi people are concerned, and you're only presenting the arguments that is in favor of the political views, and not the argument that is in favor of other groups in society, that is not an informative discussion. You will not come out of this discussion understanding the issue at hand, whether it's about human rights or about economy or about gender reforms or any other domain. And I want to just say one more thing about what is missing from the system in the education in particular. What is missing is critical thinking skills and problem solving. So this is something that has been an issue. And in fact, most of the Gulf countries, most of the new economy basically, are trying to reform their education by focusing more and more on the STEM education, without thinking about how we can bring the skills of critical thinking, the skills of problem solving into the educational curricula. I think that is, yeah.
I don't know if you'd
But
like
that's
to
it. That's exactly
finish.
what I wanted to say, and yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say.
Thank you, thank you. So, thank you so much. Well, maybe you'll be with us for a few more moments, but I would like to also give Hannah a last opportunity to respond to a number of the issues that have just been raised. Hannah.
Actually, I have a perspective on education, and the question is about, I think it was about the mismatch. I think the mismatch also comes from the fact that there are no, or our youth are not guided, or they actually know, and I think like all youth in all countries, like what to study and all of these things. So probably the opportunity is to have education for employment, something that we can talk about and teach our youth so that they are not just being educated for the sake of being educated, but educated to use their education for something that would actually pay back to them in one way or another. On the question on change from within, the lady, I believe, here asked it. And how can we change from within? We have a saying in the Quran, actually, I think it's a verse of the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِنَفْسٍ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. If I am to translate it, and I just came up, I just remembered it now, is that you can't really affect change until you affect the change within yourself first. So if I want to talk about, let's say, the economic inclusion of women, which is a subject that I advocate, I actually educated myself about it first. And then I realized its potential and its opportunities as well. And then I started advocating it. And by advocating it, I'm not just speaking about it. I am actually doing it, and I'm doing it in my hometown, and I'm doing it in my community, and I'm doing it within my circle. And I'm not discriminating whom I'm doing it with. I do it with youth, I do it with men, and I do it with women. For me, it's all about inclusion. So if I want to change something, the least thing that I can do is show you my perspective about it. Maybe you will like it. Maybe you would also can learn something from me, same way I learned something from you. And you can change it within your community, within your surrounding, and within your youth, and within particularly the youth and the future generation. So this is at least how I see it, about changing from within.
Thanks, Hannah. And Khaled, you wanted to add
Just a final point. I mean, I've lived 21 years abroad, out of Saudi, in both Canada and the UK. And there's a lot of values that I've taken out of what I've learned from people, from their educational institutions, from their governments. And what I want to do is actually bring those values back into the kingdom, but not to change on our values, but to add on to them, and to try find a way in a systematic manner which is accepted by my community, my society, and by government to change some of the things that are there. I believe the government is very open to a dialogue and to change. And when we were looking at women's employment, for instance, we believe that there might be some pushbacks on it from the government. In fact, the government was looking for solutions. They're waiting for someone to come out with it. And we were met with open arms. And I believe that at the end of the day, if someone was to change in their society, firstly, you need to be there in the society. Secondly, you need to be speaking to the government officials directly, not opposing them, engaging them. Because at the end of the day, if we continue to say, you know, we're not happy about this, we're not happy about that, this is not going to happen, what's the solutions then? We need to have solutions on the table. If solutions are there and it's met in a systematic manner, I can assure you, and this is what's happening today, that the governments will say yes, the civil society will say yes, and the public and private institutions will all say yes and accept it. It just needs to be done in a systematic, acceptable manner, and that's what's needed. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Khaled. Well, we've come to the end of this debate, and I would like to conclude by referring to yet another Saudi woman who is working on the empowerment of women in the country. Her name is Sofana Dalan. You may know of her. She's one of the first females who received a license to work as an attorney as a lawyer in Saudi Arabia. And in her work, she focuses on the modernization of Islam. And in an interview with her I saw recently, she said the following: "It is a women's era now in Saudi Arabia. We are the ones quietly enforcing more and more changes. Not from the front row, but from the back row. Few people realize it because we are not sitting in the driver's seat. But we are giving instructions from the back." And she added, "I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. It's a little bit far, but it's a bright light." On that note, I would like to conclude this evening, and I would like to thank everyone who has made this night possible, the staff of the Hoed, my assistant Dominique, my colleague Anne Rose Wasser, who have both worked very hard on organizing tonight's lecture, and of course, our very distinguished speakers. It's been wonderful and very inspiring to have you, and also to have you from Washington, Hala. I believe she's by now disappeared, but thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for sharing all your expertise and insights with us. We very much appreciate it. Please give them a warm applause.